Hello everyone, I'm Chris, and welcome to Uglesoft's Intro to HTML and CSS Making a Widget Homepage tutorial series. We care about practicality at Uglesoft, so our tutorials are built around the idea that you should be creating something useful while you are learning to develop software. So, by the end of this series, you are going to have a file on your local machine that you can open in the browser. That'll contain your favorite Spotify playlist, local weather, a Facebook page feed of your choice, links to a few of your favorite Facebook groups, a direct interface with your Google Drive, and a preview of your Google Calendar, all nicely formatted in a single page that you can customize and use every day. In this episode, we'll be going over how to get started with a local file in the browser and what HTML actually does. Now, we like to hit the ground running here, and there's a lot to learn, so don't hesitate to pause the video or rewind if you need to take a second look at something. Also, feel free to leave any questions you might have about this series in the comments, and I'll do my best to get back to you. So with that out of the way, let's dive in. Now, before we start working with HTML, let's talk about what HTML actually is. HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language, which is almost more confusing than the acronym at first. What exactly does Hypertext Markup Language mean? Well, as the name indicates, it's a markup language for hypertext. Hypertext simply represents the basic data type that web servers send to the browser when you navigate to a web page. Hypertext is the language of the internet in some real sense. As you can see, at the beginning of most website URLs, you're going to see HTTP and HTTPS most of the time. That stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol and Hypertext Transfer Protocol Secure. That's not really important for the scope of this course. The markup language aspect of it is what we're going to be focusing on. Now, the Sayability Wiki has a pretty good entry on what markup languages actually are and what they can do, and a very useful infographic that I'm going to be referencing. Now, I want to make it clear right away that markup languages and programming languages are not the same thing. Programming languages are used to compile programs that a computer can execute in order to perform computations. Markup languages are used by the browser to determine how the content of a file should be displayed. So for example, if this web page were stored as an HTML file, it would contain information about the page header and the page paragraph, along with some links and items in bullets and what buttons should do. But without the markup language, it wouldn't know that this section was a header, or that this was a paragraph, or that this was a link. By using HTML, we're able to enclose certain sections of the file with tags and reformat the display that the browser then produces for us to look at. Programming languages can be thought of as instructions for logic, computations, or programs, while markup languages can be thought of as instructions for formatting, layout, and design. Now that we've got a good idea of what HTML is and more or less what it can do, let's start developing with it. So we're going to navigate to a directory of our choice and create a new file. Text document is fine for now. We're going to call it my first HTML. Now, we don't want to save this as a text document because we want it to be an HTML file. By changing the file extension to .html, we're letting the browser sit on our machine know that this is a kind of file they can open and interpret. So go ahead and hit save. There's a little warning message, but we know what we're doing, so we'll go ahead and hit yes. Now you can see that it has a browser logo. For me, that's Google Chrome. That's my default browser of choice, and I'd recommend it if you're looking for a browser, but if you have a different one you prefer, that's fine. Let's just open this up in the browser by double-clicking, and I'll pull my tab over here. So now on my Google Chrome browser, it opened a new tab, but instead of navigating to a website URL, it took me to a file, and up here it displays the file directory, along with the actual file path. So in File Explorer, you can see that it's the same file that I just opened. Instead of connecting to the internet itself, what the browser is doing right now is pulling the information from the local file and treating it as if it were a website. So we can see a live view of what we're developing by going and opening the file in our browser. Let's add some things and see what happens. So we're going to start by opening this with Notepad. Now, I don't recommend that you develop in Notepad, but I just want to show that it's possible. Before we actually add anything to our HTML file, we need to designate the HTML element, and we do that by creating a series of tags. So the opening tag is going to look something like this, and the closing tag is going to look something like that. So an opening and a closing tag go hand in hand, and those two things designate an element. So everything in between these two tags is going to be considered part of the HTML element. We're also going to create a head opening tag and a head closing tag. The closing tags have these backslashes, and we're also going to make a opening body tag and a closing body tag. Now the head is going to contain a lot of administrative information and other things that you don't need to worry about right now. What you're concerned with is the body tags. The body tags designate the body element, and the body element is going to contain all of the information the browser is actually going to show us on the web page. Things like the text that's going to be displayed, the headers, the images, the links, the buttons, everything that you see for the most part is going to be within the body tags. So here in the body tags, let's just type out hello world, and we're going to save it. Now if we go back to the browser, it's still blank. That's because we haven't refreshed it yet. When the browser initially opens, it grabs that file information and then stores it in the memory, but it only grabs it at the time of loading up the actual tab. So if we go ahead and click refresh, it's going to reload the information, and now we can see that we have hello world. Now I don't recommend that you use Notepad. I highly recommend that you get rid of Notepad, keep it on your machine of course, but you should check out Visual Studio Code. This is the text editor / IDE of my choice that I recommend to others. You can go ahead and go to code.visualstudio.com/download and install it onto your local machine. If you have a different one you prefer, then be my guest. A lot of other people prefer Notepad++ as well. Just don't develop in plain old Notepad. You won't have a good time doing that. I already have this on my machine, so I can close this tab, head back to my file explorer. If I right click, open with code, now you're going to see all the same file contents that I just added. Now this is fine and working, but I want to go ahead and delete everything and just remake it with Visual Studio Code so you can see how much easier it is. Visual Studio Code has some assistants built in that will populate syntax for you. So if I just type out HTML and press tab, it's going to create the opening and closing tags for that element. So I just press enter and it'll do some indentation for me. I'm going to do the same thing for head, tab, and I'm going to do the same thing for body, tab. And the body one automatically gives me a line break. So let's add hello world again, and we'll save it. Heading back to the browser, we can click refresh, and now we have a live view of what's going on in our file. So we have a local file, we have a way to open it and see what the browser is going to show us, and we've got a good text editor to start developing in. So we are all set to work with HTML. So in the next episode, we're going to be going over HTML elements and the tags that designate them, things like headers, images, and so on and so forth.